Hey everybody, today I want to start my vlog by asking you a question. If this was your lake, over my shoulder right here as you're looking at all this water, if this was your lake and you were going fishing today and you launched your boat, I want to ask you the following question. What exactly would you do? Keep in mind, 90% of all that water out there has no fish in it. So where would you go and what would you do? Now, as we get started today, I want to let you know that, as promised, we're entering into a study on mapping and interpretation. And as I have mentioned many times before, Buck used to refer to this as the real separation point between the men and the boys in fishing. It was his way of saying that, in the end, the real informed, modern-day structure fisherman, this is where he separates himself from the rest of the fishing world. This is the area of study that will enable you to do what I just asked before. That is to find the fish out there in deep water. But before we actually get started talking about the details of mapping and interpretation, not only detail mapping, but general mapping, getting to the areas out there where we need to start our work, and then doing the detail work. And then once that's done, being able to interpret the exact spots where we're going to be making that cast. In order to do that, you must be grounded in the very basics of Buck's discoveries. So, as just a little review, I'm going to remind you of the first day I met Buck Perry. I want to tell you exactly what he said to me. And I know a lot of you have heard the story. Some of you have seen it on the vlog, or you've read it on my webpage when we're doing the blogs, the written blogs. I think the very first one I did was telling a story about the day I met Buck Perry. But if you haven't seen that, let me just give you a little review. And I want to tell you this morning exactly what he said to me, because it is the foundation that's needed for what we're going to be talking about over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And that is how to find fish out here in this lake. Keep in mind, 90% of that water out there has no fish in it. 90% of the water in your lake has no fish in it. So we have got to cut this thing down. We've got to break it up and simplify it and find those areas, those 10% areas where the fish are. But once we find those areas, that's not good enough. We have to then do that detailed map so that we can interpret exactly where we're going to anchor the boat, exactly when we're going to throw our cast. And that takes in a lot of territory. We need to know about the reservoirs. We need to know about the natural lakes. We need to know about the rivers, all the little idiosyncrasies. But it all is going to be talked about over the next few weeks. We're going to do a detailed study. But I need to ground you first in this. First day I met Buck, I was 28 years old and he was, I believe, 55. But he had been traveling for 30 years, 25 or 30 years at that point, traveling all around the country, fishing every type body of water there ever was to fish. He fished it all, and he spent about 325 days a year on the water. So even though he was only 55, and today I can say only 55, he was weather beaten. I mean, his skin was like leather. And when I first met him, he just reminded me of this, old man sea, he just was weather beaten. And I was just a kid. I look back on that, I was 28. Now, obviously, I was an adult, but in fishing terms, I was really a kid. I didn't realize how much I didn't know. So that very first morning, I went down and I saw him sitting in his boat. He was ready to go. It was daybreak. And I looked at this boat, 14 foot. It was just old, looked like somebody's old rent-a-boat or something. And it was just full of junk everywhere. And he had on the back of it a 9.5 horse engine. And it just looked like a mess. And I thought, what have I got myself into? See, at that time, I didn't know that he was the greatest fisherman ever lived. I didn't know he was a Hall of Fame member who had made discoveries that totally revolutionized modern day fishing. I didn't know he was a college professor with an IQ of over 200. I didn't know all of those things. He had the funniest looking old hat on. He was chewing tobacco. He just looked like some strange old dude from North Carolina. I had no idea who he really was. So as I crawled into that boat, hoping that somehow we were going to catch fish that day, and at that point I had my doubts, I thought to myself, I've made a mistake. I should have never accepted this invitation, because this cannot work out very well. We started out through this little canal. We ended up hitting the main lake, and a bunch of lily pads were rimming that lake. We went straight through all those lily pads, and he started heading across the lake. Now, this was a 20,000 acre lake. Big, round 20,000 acres. It's a big lake. And about the time we got out pretty much in the middle, he just shut that engine down, dead. And we're sitting out in the middle of the lake, not another boat anywhere in sight. And he said to me, and this is what I want to give to you as exactly as I can remember it, because it's going to be your foundation for the rest of your fishing life, if you really choose to become a great fisherman. He said to me, he said, Donald, if you really want to become a good fisherman, the very first thing you must understand is deep water is the home of the fish. He went on to say that nothing else that he might ever say beyond that point would make any sense to me or anybody else, that they first didn't accept this number one fact. The home of the fish is deep water. He went on to say that 90 to 95% of an entire adult fish's life is spent somewhere in deep water. Now, he said something takes place here that's a little bit of a problem for us. The deeper you go in any body of water, north, south, east, west, doesn't matter. The deeper you go, the colder the water becomes. And fish are cold-blooded creatures, so the colder their environment, the more dormant or inactive and slow they are. So when these fish are downstairs in this deep water, where they spend 90% of their entire life, most of the time they're inactive, semi-dormant. In translation of that is they're very difficult and sometimes impossible to catch. But I have some good news. We're saved due to the fact they don't stay there all the time. On a normal fishing day, fish will periodically become active, and they may, and I use the word may, move towards the shallows. And he said we're saved again because this movement is not in a haphazard fashion, but it's along well-defined routes. Routes which I have defined as structure, breaks, and break lines. And then he went on to define that for me by saying that structure simply is the bottom of the lake that's different in some respects from the surrounding bottom area. And he emphasized the word bottom. It's a bottom condition of a lake that's different in some respects from the surrounding bottom area. Now, you and I have done a big study on all the different types of structure that there are, so this shouldn't be anything foreign to you. But again, I'm building this foundation before we get started on mapping and interpretation. He then went on to say that most of these bottom features that he referred to as structure were quite large. In most cases, they're quite large. And even though a fish can see really well, he can't see very far. So when he's making these movements in these areas of structure, he needs some additional help to find his way. Not only to find his way as he's migrating towards the shallows, but more importantly, to find his way back to that deep water home area. And these additional features will come in the forms of what he referred to as breaks and break lines. Now let me define them for you real quick. A break is simply an object that's on or connected to in some way the overall structure, such things as rock piles, tree stumps, a sunken boat, anything that's on the bottom of that lake, if it's on or connected to structure, it could be referred to as a break. And as fish move along, they can eventually pause and then stop at one of these breaks. Now, of all of the breaks, the most important one is referred to as a break line. Definition of a break line, where you have a change in depth taking place. Most of the time we're thinking of a rather quick or sudden increase in depth. And when you have that taking place and that break runs for a distance, it's referred to as a break line. A break line is what forms the structure. If you didn't have a break line that's forming your structure, you would have no structure. You would just have a big flat area and there would be no fish. Remember, we talked, structure is the key to finding fish. So these break lines are what forms the structure. So when fish move along out of their deep water home towards the shallows, when they make this migration, they're following structure, breaks, and break lines. Now, how far the fish move and how long they stay will be completely dependent on the conditions of the weather and water at that time of that activity period. But let me caution you right here, these activity periods don't last very long. If you have one last 30 minutes, that's a good one. 45 minutes, that's a great movement of fish. So that's the reason we have to identify these areas, these spots, and we have to be in position when those fish become active and move. We need to be fishing in the right place so that we can take advantage, because when the fish become active, they're so much easier to catch. But we have to be in the right place. So this area of study, map and interpretation, that's going to give us the spots. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to teach you how you can know for sure that you're in the right place. I'm talking about not just the right area, but the right place. Now, one of the misconceptions that's floating around the industry today is that if you have a $3,000 graph and you have navionics, the ability to pull up a contour map of any lake, that your job is over. And that's so far from the truth. I am positive that by the time we're done with this area study, you'll know what I'm talking about. That's not going to give you the exact spot. Those things aren't going to give you the exact spot. You have to know how to find it, how to map it, and then how to interpret it. Buck's old adage when it came to this area of successful fishing was simply this. He said, mapping. That does not mean looking at Navionics contour map. He's talking about mapping an area of structure, getting all of the details of that structure, and then being able to sit back and interpret it. He said you can't interpret from a contour map. You can't interpret the spot. You have to develop a map. When you're out there on that lake, you have to develop a detailed map of that structure. And then you'll be able to interpret it. So Buck used to say that mapping that I'm going to teach you, and the procedures that we go through to get that exact map, so we know exactly what's down there. Mapping is the key to interpretation. Now we can interpret that spot where we're going to cast. Then we can interpret where we're going to anchor the boat to hit that spot on the cast. So, going back to his statement, it's mapping is the key to interpretation. And then he finished that by saying an interpretation is the key to knowledge. And knowledge, as I've been saying from the very beginning, is the key to fishing success. So as we begin this study, I'm going to be using a lot of Navionics maps. I'm going to be using a lot of examples. Different lakes, different reservoirs, natural lakes, all of the different reservoirs. We're going to be pulling up maps of different lakes, whether I've fished them or whether I haven't, doesn't matter. And we're going to interpret what the map is telling us. And then I'm going to give you the procedures when you're out there on that water. The exact procedures of how you need to go about getting a detailed map of that structure you've just located. and then how to interpret from that map exactly where the fish are going to be. I want to share one more thing with you before I close out today. You know that day I was telling you about with Buck Perry? When he was telling me that his little credo there, deep water's home with the fish, are saved by the fact they don't stay there all the time. When he was telling me all that stuff, it took about 15 minutes. I had no idea how important it was. And I'm being honest with you. I was a 28-year-old kid. I wanted to go out and catch fish. I had no idea what he was talking about. Everything he told me had zero impact on me. Nothing. Didn't impact me at all. I heard him, but I thought to myself, man, this guy's half nuts. We're sitting out in the middle of the lake. He's planning on catching a fish out here. There's nothing out here, nothing but water. And I was thinking those kind of thoughts. I heard what he said, and I do speak English, and so did he. But it had zero impact on me. So I want to share this with you. 3 hours later, after I was party and involved in catching half of the fish with him, we had 55 of those biggest bass I'd ever seen in my life. I think there was 3 over 10 pounds, but a lot of 7s and 8s. We had nothing but big fish on. Every 5 minutes we were catching fish. Now I want to tell you, that had an impact on me. I couldn't forget that. I had forgotten everything he said, but I couldn't forget that. He proved it to me beyond the wildest, craziest dream I ever had about catching fish that morning. It was unbelievable. So it was because of the fish, it was because of that experience that I went back and reviewed and started studying, because I knew this guy had it all right. And there's still people today that try to dispute all of Buck's discoveries and stuff. And it's so ridiculous. So many bass fishermen, I just wrote a blog about it, so many bass fishermen today, they're doing exactly what Grandpappy used to do. Cruising along a shoreline, casting the weeds, they beating the banks, and over and over and over and over. And the fish aren't in there. They're out there. For the life of me, it boggles my mind why we can't get the average bass fisherman off of the bank and out there where the fish are. And the real reason we can't is because they don't know where to go. They don't have any idea where to throw a cast out there. But there are targets in deep water. And that's what we're going to be discovering over the next 5, 6, 7 weeks. We're going to be talking about the targets in deep water. My entire fishing career changed when I started understanding about the deep water tendencies, about the reliance that fish have on structure, breaks, and break lines. And when I got started out there fishing in that deep water, fishing deep structure, my whole life changed. And yours will too. But we got to get those bass fishermen off the bank and get them out there where the fish are, because the oldest adage in fishing there is, you can't catch a fish if you're fishing where he ain't. That's simple. You be the best caster, the best troller, the best equipment that money can buy. You could have a $5,000 graph and all the other stuff. If you're fishing where there are no fish, you can't catch one. Bottom line. I'm going to be teaching how to find those fish out there, because Buck taught me. I'm going to share it with you. Doesn't cost you any money either. So do me a favor. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, or whatever you do, subscribe, ring the bell. I don't want you to miss one episode when we're talking about this map and interpretation. I want you to see every blog I do, and I want you to study it. And I want you to get really good so you start catching fish like I did back in 1970. And it hasn't changed since, and the fish haven't changed either. So thanks for being with me today, and I'll see you the next time.